You know that feeling when you walk into a room and the air just freezes, like everyone's holding their breath at the exact same second? Yeah, that's exactly what the Silver Creek County Courthouse felt like that morning. Outside, snow was blowing sideways, slamming against the windows like tiny fists. Colorado winters are rough, but that day felt colder than usual. Not the kind of cold that bites your skin, no. The kind that settles into your bones and just sits there, heavy and miserable. Inside the courtroom, people were packed shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in puffy coats, wool scarves, thick knitted hats. Some still had snowflakes melting in their hair, because they'd rushed in so fast they didn't even bother shaking it off. You could hear them whispering, soft, tense, scared, like they were afraid saying anything too loud might break something sacred in the air. And in the middle of all that was this tiny little girl, Ava Collins, 3 years old, barely big enough to wrap both hands around a mug of hot chocolate. She was so small that the bailiff had to lift her with both arms and carry her to the witness stand like she was made of glass. I swear, when people saw her face, the whole room just stopped. Everything, every sound, every movement. Even the judge froze mid-breath. Her eyes, God, they didn't look like a child's eyes. Kids are supposed to have sparkly eyes, curious eyes, jumpy, happy, wild eyes. But Ava's? They were dull, empty, like someone had reached inside her tiny chest and quietly turned off the lights. She didn't look around, didn't blink much, didn't cling to the blanket she was holding. She just stared straight ahead, like she was still stuck in the nightmare from that night and hadn't found her way out. People in Silver Creek had been talking about it for weeks. The night her mother, Rachel Collins, was attacked in their little blue house on Willow Lane. A quiet neighborhood, you know. The kind with Christmas lights still hanging on porches after January, kids' bikes lying in driveways, and everybody waving at each other from across the street. Nothing bad ever happened there. Well, nothing used to happen there. But that night changed everything, and ever since, Ava hadn't said a single word. Not one. Not even a cry. The doctors said it was trauma, the kind that swallows a kid whole. So now she was here, 3 years old, in a big wooden chair she could barely sit in, with the entire town watching her like she was the only person who could save them from the truth. And down in the first row sat Coda, a massive German shepherd with thick black and tan fur and eyes that looked like he could read souls if he wanted to. He wore his K9 vest, but honestly, he didn't need it. Everyone in town already knew who he was. Officer Daniel Cruz's partner, the dog who found Rachel Collins bleeding on her living room floor, the dog who sniffed through the house that night and let out that low, terrifying growl nobody could forget. Coda wasn't sitting still, not like other police dogs who just lie down and wait. No, he was locked in, his ears forward, his eyes sharp, unblinking. And the strangest part, he wasn't looking at the judge, or Officer Daniel, or even the defendant. He was looking straight at Ava, like he'd been waiting for her, like he recognized her pain, like he knew something the rest of the world was too blind or too scared to see. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, but it sounded weak. Bring the child forward, please." The prosecutor crouched beside her, speaking soft, careful, like someone trying not to spook a wild bird. "Ava, sweetheart, do you remember anything from that night?" Nothing. Not a blink. Not a twitch. The silence stretched so long, people began glancing at one another. Eyes wide, throats tight. Everyone knew the case was hanging by a thread. Without Ava's voice, they had nothing solid, nothing to hold Brian Keller accountable, nothing to give Rachel Collins justice. And for a moment, just one awful moment, it felt like the entire town sank into the same darkness Ava had been living in. But then, something shifted. Not big, not loud, just a breath. A tiny flicker in Ava's gaze. Her eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, moved, slowly, carefully, like waking up underwater. She turned her head toward Coda. The room followed her gaze. Hundreds of people leaning forward in one synchronized motion. Coda stood, not fast, not violently, but with purpose. With this silent, powerful certainty that made every hair on the back of every neck stand up. Ava's fingers trembled around the edge of the witness stand. Her lips parted, just slightly, like she wasn't sure they still worked. For one heartbeat, 2, 3. The entire world held still. Snow hammered the courthouse windows. People forgot how to breathe. Then Ava lifted her hand, small, shaking, fragile as a leaf in winter, and pointed at the dog who refused to look away from her. "He knows." Just 2 words, barely a whisper, but they hit the room like a lightning bolt cracking through the ceiling. Someone gasped. Someone else covered their mouth. Even the judge flinched like he'd been slapped. And Coda? His tail didn't move. His ears didn't drop. He just stared at the defendant with a look that could burn through steel. That was the moment everyone in Silver Creek realized. Nothing about this case was what they thought. And whatever truth Coda knew, they weren't ready for it. And you'd think, right after Ava whispered those 2 tiny words, the room would explode with questions, or noise, or some reaction big enough to match what everyone just heard. But no, it didn't happen like that at all. Instead, everything collapsed into this strange, heavy silence. A silence thicker than the winter air outside. A silence that almost hurt. Ava's little arm, the one she had lifted toward Coda, slowly sank back down, like she didn't have the strength to hold it up anymore. Her fingers curled into a fist, squeezing so tight her knuckles turned white. And her breath, I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't crying, wasn't talking. It was like she forgot how to breathe normally. Judge Harrison leaned forward a little, his voice softer than you'd ever expect from a man who had been on the bench for 25 years. Ava, sweetheart, can you tell us anything else? And right there, you could see it happen. The fear. It flickered across Ava's face like a shadow sliding over a wall. Her mouth twitched, her chin trembled, and her eyes, God. They filled up so fast, it was like someone had opened a faucet inside her. But no sound came out, not a word, not even a broken syllable. Just that painful silence again. She tried. You could see it. Her little throat tightening, her lips parting, her chest rising in shaky, uneven breaths. And then, bam! It was like her own body betrayed her. Her voice just refused to come. All she managed was this soft, choked little squeak, like a bird with a broken wing trying to sing. People in the courtroom started shifting, not out of impatience. No, it was something heavier, much heavier. Hopelessness. This slow, creeping realization that maybe this tiny girl had been hurt so deeply, so violently, that speaking, even remembering, might be impossible for her now. Officer Daniel Cruz, sitting beside Coda, lowered his head, not in shame, but because he couldn't bear watching her struggle. He'd seen grown men break down before, victims freeze. But a 3-year-old? A little girl who could barely reach the microphone? That kind of damage changes you, makes you angry in a way that shakes your bones. Ava's tiny shoulders curled inward, like she was trying to make herself smaller, hide herself, fold into her own body so nobody could see her. Her fists tightened again, nails digging into her palms. Her eyes were red now, bright red, trembling, like she was standing on the edge of shattering. And the truth is, no one really knew what she had witnessed that night. Not fully. Sure, the cops had theories, neighbors had whispers, doctors had cold, clinical notes. But the real truth, the truth that mattered, was locked inside the mind of a 3-year-old who couldn't process terror that big. It was the kind of fear that doesn't fade, the kind that stays, the kind that plants roots in your memory, curling around everything until you can't separate nightmare from reality. A woman in the second row, someone who used to babysit neighborhood kids, covered her mouth with both hands, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered, "Poor baby. Oh God." But her voice cracked so badly, no one could understand the rest. Even the defense attorney, stiff and aggressive earlier, looked deflated, like seeing a child in that much pain knocked the wind right out of him. Then it got worse. Ava's breathing quickened. Not loud, not dramatic, Just short, sharp inhales that stabbed through the silence like daggers, her chest rising too fast, her hands trembling, her gaze darting around as if the room itself was closing in on her. A panic response, pure, raw, unfiltered. And not a single adult in that room felt anything but helpless. Judge Harrison whispered, "It's okay, Ava. You're safe here. Take your time, sweetheart." But she couldn't hear him. Not really. She was somewhere else entirely. Back in that house, maybe. Back in that moment when the world cracked open beneath her. Her lips parted again. Just a little. Like she wanted to say something. Needed to say it. But what came out wasn't a word. It was a breath. A tiny, trembling breath so scared the entire courtroom flinched. And then, just when it seemed like she might speak, she shut down. Completely. Her shoulders dropped. Her hands fell limp. And her eyes, those beautiful, broken little eyes, went blank again. Te liet. Like someone had flipped the off switch inside her. Judge Harrison leaned back, defeated. The prosecutor lowered her head, whispering, "Oh no." People exchanged helpless glances, tears filling their eyes. And the weight of what Ava carried, the depth of her trauma, the horror she'd witnessed, hit the room all at once. This wasn't just a little girl who couldn't talk. This was a little girl who had seen something so terrifying, so soul-crushing, that her own voice abandoned her. And honestly, no one, absolutely no one, was ready for the truth she was still hiding. If you thought the silence in that courtroom was heavy, then it was nothing compared to what happened the night everything fell apart in the Collins house. And honestly, to understand why Ava froze like that, why her whole little body shuts down whenever someone brings up that night, you kinda have to go back there with her. Not literally, of course, but emotionally, mentally, into the dark. Because that's where this whole nightmare started. It was December 14th, the kind of winter night where snow falls slow at first, like little feathers drifting around street lamps. And then all at once, the sky just decides to dump everything it has. The whole town of Silver Creek was drowned in white. Roofs, sidewalks, cars, everything buried under a thick blanket of snow. And inside the small blue house on Willow Lane, a different kind of storm was happening. The front door was cracked open, not broken, not kicked in, just slightly ajar. Enough for wind to push snowflakes inside, letting them melt on the hardwood floors like tiny ghosts. When Officer Daniel Cruz arrived, the first thing he noticed wasn't the door. It was the smell. Copper. Sharp. Wrong. You don't forget that smell. You don't ever get used to it either. Daniel called for Coda, and the dog slipped past him with this low, controlled focus, like he already knew something terrible was waiting inside. The living room was a wreck, not in a thrown around, robbed by strangers way, but in a violent, frantic, someone lost control kind of way. A lamp knocked over, a chair flipped, a framed picture lying face down, glass shattered around it like ice. And right there, in the middle of the chaos, was Rachel Collins. She was on the floor, half on the rug, half on the hardwood, her hair spread around her like spilled ink. Snowflakes landed on her skin, melting instantly, mixing with something dark and thick that shouldn't have been there. And her breathing, barely noticeable, so faint it almost looked like she wasn't breathing at all. But the worst part, the part burned into Daniel's mind forever, was Ava. Tiny, trembling, curled up in the corner behind the sofa, like she tried to hide, but her little body couldn't make it all the way. She was hugging her knees, chin tucked to her chest, shaking so violently her teeth were almost chattering. But there were no tears, no screams, no cries for help, just emptiness. Like she had gone somewhere deep inside herself and locked the door. Daniel whispered, "Ava, sweetheart." But she didn't look at him. Didn't even blink. That's when Coda moved. He wasn't sniffing aimlessly, not checking random corners. No. He followed a very specific path, straight toward the corner where Ava was sitting. He crouched down, lowered his head, and sniffed the air right next to her. Then, something changed. Coda froze. Every muscle in his body tightened. His ears pushed forward so sharply they looked like they might tear. And then, like lightning, he jerked backward, hard, fast, like something invisible had jumped at him. He growled, a deep, rumbling sound that didn't even sound like a dog anymore. It sounded ancient, primal, like he was warning the darkness itself. Daniel had never heard Coda growl like that, not once in all their years working together. "Coda, hey, easy boy," he whispered. But Coda kept staring at the exact same spot on the floor. Not at Rachel, not at the broken lamp, not at the open door. A single spot of carpet, just inches from Ava's tiny feet. Like there was a scent there, a familiar one, a dangerous one. And that's when a chill ran up Daniel's spine, colder than any winter wind. Because Coda didn't act like he found something new. He acted like he recognized something old. Something he'd smelled before. Something, or someone, he already knew. Daniel didn't say it out loud. Not then. But the thought hit him like someone whispered it right in his ear. The person who did this has been here before. It wasn't random, wasn't a stranger. It was someone close, someone familiar, someone Ava had probably seen with her own eyes. And whatever that person did that night, it terrified her so deeply her voice broke. A single snowflake drifted inside, landed next to Rachel's arm, and melted into the blood soaked into the rug. Daniel swallowed hard and whispered, "We're at 85%. Dear God, what happened in here?" But no one answered. Not Rachel, not Ava, not the broken furniture or the open doorway. Only Coda. He turned his head slowly, very slowly, and looked up at Daniel with an expression that wasn't just alert. It was a warning. A warning that whatever truth they were chasing was darker, closer, and far more personal than anyone in Silver Creek had imagined. Now let me ask you something. Just you and me, all right? If you were standing in that living room that night, what would have shaken you more? 1, the blood. 2, the silence. Or 5, the way Coda reacted like he knew the monster already. Tell me in the comments. I'm honestly curious. And the thing is, after that night at the Collins house, after Coda reacted the way he did, after Daniel saw the fear sitting like a shadow behind Ava's eyes, you'd think the case would have gotten easier. You'd think the truth would start falling into place like puzzle pieces. But the opposite happened. Everything got messier, foggy, almost hopeless. Because the moment investigators started digging into the details, everything they found just fell apart. The first person they looked at, naturally, was Brian Keller, the Collins' next-door neighbor. He lived 2 houses down, always seemed friendly enough. The kind of guy who waved from his porch, shoveled his driveway early, lent tools to people on the street. Harmless, ordinary. But you know how sometimes someone looks too ordinary? Yeah, that. Brian had been near the area that night. Close enough to hear something, see something, know something. And he was one of the last people to speak to Rachel earlier that week. So the cops brought him in. And what did he do? He played innocent, flawlessly, hands folded, calm voice, saying things like, "I don't know anything, officer. And Rachel was a good neighbor. And why would I ever hurt her?" And the annoying part? There wasn't a trace, not a grain, of physical evidence pointing to him. No fingerprints on the doorknob, no footprints in the snow, no glove fibers, no broken window glass with his skin cells on it. Nothing. It was like the person who attacked Rachel floated into the house like a ghost and vanished into thin air. Daniel hated that feeling, that too clean feeling, when a crime scene feels scrubbed, planned, intentional. But the worst part? No cameras. Silver Creek was a quiet town. Too quiet. No Ring doorbells. No neighbors with security cams pointed at the street. The Collins house didn't have anything except cheap motion lights that froze up in cold weather. So, no footage. No surveillance. No outsider caught on camera. Just darkness and snow. Neighbors? Didn't see anything. Most were asleep early because of the blizzard warning at 9 p.m. So no witnesses. None. Well, except one. Time 700 mems. A little girl frozen on the living room floor. Ava. But she couldn't speak. Not a sentence. Not a word. Not even a broken whisper besides those two in the courtroom. And even those two weren't official testimony. Her trauma had locked her voice behind a wall no one could break. The case was hanging by threads thinner than spider silk. People in town started whispering, loud enough for reporters to hear. What if they arrested the wrong guy? What if Brian really is innocent? What if the real monster is still out there? And those whispers made their way into the courthouse. Judge Harrison wasn't a man who liked uncertainty. He was older, 60-something, sharp eyes, reputation for fairness. But fairness goes both ways. And the more he looked at the evidence, or the lack of it, the more doubt crept into his posture. Jaw tightening, brows folding into that worried wrinkle judges get when a case starts cracking apart. During a recess, he told the prosecutor, in this tired, frustrated voice, Do we actually have enough here? Enough to charge him? Enough to hold this man responsible? Because right now, it feels like the only person who knows the truth is a 3-year-old child who can't speak. And that sentence shook people hard. Because when the judge starts questioning the case, you know you're standing on thin ice. Daniel heard him, and he felt something hot rise in his chest. Not anger exactly, but something close. A mix of helplessness, fear, frustration. He wanted to scream, Ava knows! Coda knows! Someone familiar was there that night. But he couldn't prove any of it. Instinct wasn't evidence. A child's trauma wasn't evidence. A dog's reaction wasn't evidence. So the prosecutor pushed back. Judge, Coda's behavior is significant. He's trained. Judge Harrison sighed hard. Trained, yes. Psychic, no. And that was it. The wall. The system's wall. Because no matter how much Daniel trusted his partner, the court didn't trust a dog's instincts. Not officially. Time 1.5s. And with every hour that passed, Brian Keller looked more and more like a man slipping through the cracks. He had an alibi. Shaky, but still an alibi. He said he'd been home watching TV, drinking beer, fell asleep around 10 p.m. No one could confirm it, but no one could disprove it either. Cops checked his house. Nothing. Checked his car. Nothing. Checked his clothes. Nothing. It was infuriating. Because someone hurt Rachel Collins. Someone almost ended her life. And the longer the investigation dragged on, the more it felt like justice was slipping away. Just like that. At one point, Daniel stepped into the hallway, leaned against the wall, and just stared. He whispered, "How do you catch a monster when it leaves no footprints?" Coda sat beside him, ears alert, eyes locked on the courtroom doors, like he was tracking something nobody else could see. And Daniel felt this horrible thought, this sinking pit in his stomach. What if Brian Keller walks free? What if the monster goes home tonight? Back to Silver Creek? Back into the neighborhood? Back near Ava? And that question, Man, that hit harder than anything. Because if justice can't find its way when a child is hurting, then what hope does anyone have? And the thing about moments like that, those moments when justice feels like it's slipping straight through your fingers, is that sometimes life throws you something completely unexpected, something you can't prepare for, something that doesn't feel real until you're already standing in the middle of it. And that's exactly what happened next. Because while the adults were arguing, doubting, whispering, basically losing hope, Ava wasn't listening to any of it. She was just sitting there, tiny, quiet, barely moving. Almost like her soul had stepped out of her body and left her behind. Her little hands were gripping the edge of the witness stand so tightly her fingertips were turning pink, almost purple. She looked so fragile it felt like even the wrong kind of breath in the room might break her. Judge Harrison tried again, voice gentle in that quiet, "Please, kid, help us" kind of way. "Ava, sweetheart, if you can tell us anything at all, anything, it would help." She didn't answer. Not at first. She just sat there shaking, small tremors running through her shoulders, arms, even her little legs dangling off the chair. She looked like she was freezing even though the courtroom was warm. But then, it happened. It was subtle, barely noticeable, almost like watching a shadow shift on a wall. Her head, slowly, painfully slowly, turned, not toward the judge, not toward her grandmother, not toward Brian Keller sitting stiff and pale at the defense table. No. Her eyes, wet, trembling, slid across the room, searching, drifting, until they landed on one thing. Coda. And the second her gaze hit him, her shaking changed. Not less. Worse. Deeper. More violent. Her shoulders jerked. Her breath hitched. Her knees pulled tighter to her chest. It was like something inside her recognized something inside him. Like trauma calling out to instinct. Like fear whispering to truth. Coda didn't move at first, but his ears twitched. His tail stiffened. His chest rose in that slow, tense inhale police dogs make when they're locking onto something. The prosecutor whispered, "Ava, honey, are you looking at the dog?" Ava didn't nod, didn't blink, didn't breathe. She just stared, locked in, unblinking, like someone was holding her head still. Then her hand moved, barely, just the smallest lift of her fingers, like her body didn't want her to do it. But something deeper, memory, terror, forced it upward. Her tiny arm shook so hard, the whole courtroom noticed. Even from the back, people gasped softly. Because this wasn't normal shaking. This was the shaking of a child remembering something she never should have seen. Her hand rose higher, jerky, uneven, like she was fighting gravity itself. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Her grandmother started crying silently, hands pressed over her mouth. And Brian Keller, trying to look calm, began fidgeting, adjusting his tie like it suddenly felt too tight. Ava's arm kept rising. Coda finally stood, not like a dog responding to a command. No. He rose slow, deliberate, controlled, like a soldier coming to attention. His eyes locked on Ava's. Then, without warning, his head snapped sharply toward Brian. You could feel the panic ripple across the room. "Ava," Judge Harrison said, voice cracking, "are you pointing at—" But she wasn't pointing at Brian. Not directly. She was pointing at Coda. Her entire arm lifted, shaking like it might snap in half, aimed straight at the dog, who refused to look away from her. Then her lips parted. A tiny breath escaped. So small, so broken, it barely sounded human. But somehow, she forced the words out anyway. 2 syllables, 2 words. Barely a whisper. "He knows." And the courtroom just imploded. Not loudly, not with screams, but with a wave of stunned disbelief that crashed through everyone at once. People froze mid-motion. Someone dropped a coffee cup. A deputy cursed under his breath. A reporter in the second row covered his heart. Even Judge Harrison sat back like he'd been punched. Because those 2 words weren't just words. They were a knife cutting straight through the uncertainty choking the entire case. He knows. Not "I saw him." Not "he did it." Not "help." But he knows. A claim. A warning. A plea. A confession hidden inside trauma a child couldn't explain. The prosecutor whispered, "Ava, sweetheart, who knows?" But she didn't answer. She couldn't. Her hand dropped. Her breathing quickened. Her eyes glazed over, trauma slamming the door shut on her voice. Coda growled. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just this deep rumbling sound that vibrated off the benches and crawled under everyone's skin. Brian Keller flinched so hard, the entire front row saw it. And in that 1 second, you could feel the entire direction of the trial shift. Truth had just walked into the room, and it didn't come from evidence, or testimony, or confessions. It came from a broken little girl pointing at a dog who refused to look away. And right after those 2 tiny words slipped out of Ava, "He knows," it was like the entire courthouse forgot how to exist. People didn't breathe, didn't shift, didn't blink. Even the buzzing lights overhead sounded like they got quieter. But Coda, he wasn't frozen, no. He moved. And the way he moved, God, it didn't feel normal. Not like a pet hearing a noise, not like a trained K9 awaiting a command. No, this was something heavier, older, instinctive. The kind of movement that makes every hair on your arms stand straight up. He rose slowly, like something unseen pulled him to his feet, like a force behind him whispered, "Now." His paws touched the wooden floor with a dull, heavy thump. One step, another. Each step sounded louder than it should have. Too loud for a dog his size. Loud enough that people in the back row leaned away as if the vibrations were crawling up their legs. Someone whispered, "What's he doing?" But it wasn't a question. It was a prayer. Because everyone in that room knew something had shifted. A line had been crossed. A truth was waking up. Ava didn't move. Her little hand dropped into her lap like the strength had drained out of her. But her eyes, her wide, trembling eyes, never left Coda. Not even for a heartbeat. It was like she was watching something she had already seen before. Something broken into pieces. Shadows, sounds, flashes. A nightmare dripping back into reality. Judge Harrison's voice cracked. "Officer Cruz, restrain your dog." But Daniel didn't move. Not because he didn't want to. Not because he didn't hear. But because something in Coda's posture made interfering feel wrong. Dangerous. Like stopping him would be interrupting a truth that needed to come out. And Coda kept walking. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable. People slid to the edges of their benches without even realizing it. Mothers pulled their children close. A reporter lowered her camera as if she suddenly felt intrusive. And at the defense table, Brian Keller stiffened. You could see the moment Coda's gaze met his. Brian's throat bobbed. His fingers twitched. His jaw clenched. So hard the muscles in his neck shook. The man was trying, really trying, to hold himself together, to look innocent, confused, outraged. Whatever his lawyer had told him to be. But his skin told the truth first. It drained of color, pink to pale, pale to ghost white, in 3 seconds. "Keller, you okay?" his attorney whispered. But Keller didn't answer. He couldn't. Because Coda was right in front of him now. The dog stopped so sharply, it looked like the air itself had grabbed him. His nails clicked once against the floor as he planted his weight. Firm, centered, towering. And then, Coda stared. Not curious, not confused, not waiting. This stare felt surgical, precise, like he was peeling Brian open with his eyes and checking what was inside. His nostrils widened. His ears locked forward. His shoulders tightened. Every fiber of his body leaned into the moment like he was ready to pounce. Not out of aggression, but certainty. A certainty no human in that room had. Brian tried looking away. Failed. He tried shifting his chair. Didn't dare. He tried swallowing. Barely managed. Because guilt, true guilt, doesn't hide well when cornered by a creature who sees through scent, through instinct, through truth. "Keller," Judge Harrison barked, "remain still." But the man wasn't moving anyway. He had frozen long before the judge spoke. And Coda? Coda leaned in closer. He didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth. That would have been normal, predictable. Instead, he just breathed in, a slow, deep inhale through his nose, right near Brian Keller's coat. And when that breath ended, his entire body stiffened. The fur along his spine rose like static. His tail locked straight. His head jerked in a sudden, sharp tilt. Everyone in that courtroom felt the temperature drop, like someone opened a freezer door, like winter itself slid under their skin. Coda's eyes narrowed. His chest rumbled. Not a growl, not a warning. Something in between. Something ancient. And that was when Brian broke. He jerked backwards so hard his chair screamed across the floor. Get that thing away from me!" But Coda didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just stared deeper, like he was watching the exact moment, the exact memory, the exact crime play out in Brian's scent, his posture, his fear. Daniel finally stepped forward, but he didn't pull Coda back. He just placed a hand on the dog's vest and whispered, "Easy, boy. I know." But he didn't know, not yet. Only Coda did. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood something terrible. This wasn't random. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't coincidence. Coda recognized something in Brian Keller. Something from that night. Something he wasn't supposed to know. Something Ava had seen. Something only a monster could leave behind. And the crazy thing is, after Coda locked eyes with Brian like that, after every ounce of air got sucked out of the courtroom, nobody knew what was supposed to happen next. Not the judge, not the lawyers, not even Daniel. It was like the whole room was stuck on pause. Brian sat frozen, breathing in these weird, sharp little gulps like his lungs had forgotten how to work. His hands twitched, not shaking, not steady, just twitching, like even they were confused. Coda didn't break his stare. Not once. Not even when Brian flinched. Then, out of nowhere, the dog shifted his gaze downward. Slow, purposeful, almost too calm. His eyes locked onto a black leather satchel resting beside Brian's chair. The kind of bag lawyers use for documents. But this one wasn't the lawyer's. It was Brian's. The air changed again, heavier, tighter, a pressure crawling along the walls, sliding up the backs of people's necks. Coda, Daniel whispered. But Coda didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone. Instead, he lifted one paw, steady, controlled, and set it right on top of the bag. One paw, one touch. But the sound, God. The sound echoed like a hammer striking the floor. Thump. People in the second and third rows jumped. Someone gasped. Brian jerked back so hard his chair nearly tipped. Judge Harrison stood up halfway. "Officer Cruz, control your dog." But before Daniel could react, Coda barked. One bark. But it wasn't normal. Not even close. It was loud, sharp, powerful enough to rattle the wooden benches. Papers fluttered. A woman in a red coat clutched her chest and whispered, "Lord have mercy." Brian let out a strangled noise, half cough, half fear, and scrambled back another inch. Every single person in that room stared at that bag like it had just started ticking like a bomb. Daniel crouched beside Coda, voice low, trembling. "Easy, boy. What do you smell?" But deep down, everyone already knew. Because canines don't bark like that unless they're absolutely certain. A bailiff stepped forward, hesitant, almost shaking. "Judge, should we?" Harrison swallowed hard. "Yes. Open it." The room leaned forward on instinct. Nobody breathed. Nobody blinked. The bailiff crouched, fingers hooking under the flap of the bag. He hesitated, like he feared touching it, then flipped it open. And that's when everything broke. Inside, nestled between Brian's wallet and a stack of folded papers, was something small, metallic, and unmistakably out of place. A silver necklace. Thin chain. Tiny pendant. Engraved with 2 letters. R.C. Rachel Collins. The first scream didn't come from an adult. It came from Ava. A piercing, raw, heart-shredding cry ripped from her tiny body like something trapped inside her for weeks had finally broken loose. "That's my mommy's." Her voice echoed so loud the microphones screeched. People flinched. A grandmother sobbed. Reporters dropped their phones. It didn't even feel like a human sound. It felt like pain itself had found a voice. Ava stood up on the witness chair, her whole little body shaking, face red, tears exploding down her cheeks. She pointed at the necklace, screaming again and again, "That's Mommy's! That's Mommy's!" Her grandmother lunged forward crying, "Oh, honey, no, no, baby." The bailiff lifted the chain from the bag, his hands trembling. It dangled in the air, catching the courtroom lights, swinging like a blade. Brian's face. You could actually watch the blood drain out of it. His jaw fell open. His fingers clamped the table. He whispered, I swear I didn't. This isn't. Someone planted. but nobody bought it. Not with Coda snarling low at Daniel's side. Not with Ava screaming her lungs out. Not with the necklace shining like a confession. Even his own lawyer edged away from him like Brian suddenly carried a plague. Judge Harrison tried to bang his gavel, but his hand was shaking too hard. "Order! Order in this courtroom!" But there was no order. There was no chance of order. The truth had just walked in, loud, sharp, undeniable, from the one place Brian thought he'd hidden it. Coda took one step closer, chest puffed, eyes locked on Brian with a cold, ancient certainty. And for the first time since the trial began, Brian Keller looked like a man who knew the walls were closing in. The lies were cracking. The mask was slipping. The truth, ugly and unavoidable, was rising like a monster he couldn't outrun. Now let me ask you, because honestly, I can't stop thinking about it. If that necklace was pulled out right in front of you, would your gut say, 1, he's guilty, 2, he's lying, badly, or 3, something darker is still coming? And honestly, after that necklace came out of the bag, after Ava's scream ripped through the courtroom like a tornado, there was no coming back from it. You could feel it, like something had snapped clean in half, and nothing was ever going to be the same again. The room wasn't quiet anymore. Hell no. People were talking over each other, crying, gasping, praying under their breath. Reporters scrambling for angles, lawyers shouting, "Order! Order!" Even though nobody, not one soul, was listening. It was chaos. Real, raw, human chaos. But in the middle of all that noise, Brian Keller looked like a man whose world had just caved in. His face shifted into this strange, blotchy color, part gray, part blue, part something that didn't look human at all. His lips trembled, then his jaw, then his shoulders, like fear was crawling through him, inch by inch. And his hands? They shook so violently, he had to grip the table just to keep them from sliding off. Daniel stepped in front of Coda, hand on the dog's vest, not to restrain him, but because even he didn't know what Coda might do next. The dog wasn't barking now, wasn't growling, but his eyes. Oh God, his eyes. That stare. You know that look animals get when they recognize something dangerous, something familiar, something they've already decided is a threat? Yeah, that. Coda's stare was sharp enough to cut through bone. Brian tried to talk, tried to force out something that sounded like a sentence. But what came out was this broken stutter, not even close to words. I don't, I swear, it's not. His lawyer grabbed his arm. Brian, stop talking. But he couldn't, or wouldn't. Or maybe his lies had finally run out of places to hide. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel hard enough to crack wood and shouted, "Mr. Keller, do not speak!" But Brian didn't seem to hear him. His eyes were locked on Coda, not on the judge, not on the bailiff, not on the necklace, just the dog. Like Coda was the only thing in the world that existed. And then it happened. Brian's whole body sagged, like someone yanked the bones right out of him. He dropped back into his chair, hands clutching his hair, shaking his head over and over like he was trying to shake the memory loose. I didn't mean... His voice cracked so sharply, it echoed off the walls. The courtroom fell silent, not because anyone commanded it, but because everyone felt what was coming. Something big, something ugly, something final. Brian gasped for air, tears spilling down his cheeks. Ugly, broken sobs that didn't resemble innocence in any way. I just needed money. I didn't go there to hurt her, okay? I swear to God I didn't. I lost my job. I thought maybe she'd... He swallowed hard, breath hitching like a trapped animal. I thought maybe she'd help me. Rachel always helped people. Nobody moved. Nobody comforted him. Nobody believed the "I didn't mean to" routine. Because everything about this moment felt intentional, desperate, rotten. Brian's voice dropped to a whisper, ragged, shaking. When she said no, I lost it. I don't know what happened. She tried to push me out the door. She grabbed my arm. He squeezed his eyes shut and let out a sound somewhere between a cry and a scream. I shoved her harder than I meant to. She hit the floor. She wouldn't get up. I panicked. All right? Someone in the crowd muttered, "Monster." Someone else cried, "She trusted you." But Brian kept talking. Like once the dam cracked, everything behind it rushed out at once. I saw the necklace. I don't know why I grabbed it. I thought maybe if it looked like a robbery. His words dissolved into nothing. Disgust, rage, heartbreak. It filled the room like smoke. A woman in the third row sobbed. An older man shook his head. Even the court stenographer typed through her tears. And Coda? He stepped forward again. One step. Slow. Heavy. Brian flinched so violently he knocked his chair sideways. He scrambled away like Coda was fire and he was gasoline. "Get him away from me! Keep that damn dog away!" But nobody moved to help him. Not the deputies. Not the judge. Not even his lawyer. Because everyone in that room saw the same thing. Coda wasn't attacking him. He was confirming something. Recognizing the scent of guilt, the smell of violence, the memory of that night. And that was the moment everything finally clicked into place. Brian's sobs echoed across the room. Ava's grandmother held her tight, whispering, "It's okay now, baby. It's okay. And justice, after weeks of fear and silence, finally felt real. It finally had a shape, a name, a confession. And the wild thing is, after Brian's confession exploded through that courtroom, after every lie he'd been clinging to finally tore apart, there wasn't even a second of confusion about what came next. Not one. The deputies didn't hesitate, didn't stall, didn't wait for the room to calm down. They moved fast, like justice itself had jumped into their bodies. One grabbed Brian's wrist, the other went for the cuffs, and the sound those cuffs made, click, click, felt like the first clean breath Silver Creek had taken in weeks. Brian didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't run. He just sagged between the deputies, sobbing, shoulders shaking, face buried in his hands, like he'd suddenly realized what he'd destroyed. But sympathy, yeah. No, he didn't get any. Because the second he stood, the gallery rose too. Not politely, not quietly. They erupted, some yelling, some crying, some shouting, "Coward!" or "How could you?" It was heartbreak and fury and relief all tangled together. Raw, human pain that had been building since that horrible night on Willow Lane. One older man, someone who'd known the Collins family for years, shouted, "You hurt the wrong family, Keller!" His voice cracked, tears running down his face. "And you hurt a baby. A baby." Even Judge Harrison looked shaken. And judges never look shaken. But not that day. Not in that room. The courtroom doors swung open and deputies marched Brian down the aisle. Snowlight spilled in from the hallway, hitting the cuffs on his wrists, making them glint like cold fire. People shouted after him, spitting words like arrows, unloading anger they'd been carrying far too long. And as they led him out onto the courthouse steps, Silver Creek was waiting. Not a handful of neighbors, not a curious crowd. The entire damn town. Mothers, fathers, store owners, teachers, teenagers skipping class, old men leaning on canes, all packed together under falling snow, breath fogging the winter air like smoke. The moment Brian appeared, the crowd erupted again. Boos, shouts, tears, rage, relief. Some held signs, "Justice for Rachel," "Protect the children," and one that read, "No mercy for monsters." Brian stumbled when he heard that. He had to be yanked forward just to keep moving. But he wasn't the one the crowd came to see. No, the hero walked out next. Coda. Officer Daniel led him through the doors, and the shift in the atmosphere was instant, like the whole crowd inhaled at the same time. The shouting didn't stop, but it changed, softened, warmed. It rose into cheers. And then, nobody knows who started it. A chant began. Soft at first, Guardian, guardian. Then louder, guardian, guardian. Until the entire town of Silver Creek, hundreds of people standing shoulder to shoulder in the falling snow, shouted in one booming, unstoppable voice, "The guardian of the silent child." Daniel closed his eyes. Coda lifted his head, calm, confident, steady, like he understood every word. This wasn't just justice. This wasn't just relief. This was hope. A wildfire of hope blazing through a town that had been drowning in fear for far too long. And honestly, watching it all unfold, you could feel it in your bones. That sense that kindness, instinct, and courage still matter. That sometimes the world actually does the right thing. And sometimes heroes have 4 legs instead of 2. And the thing is, after that day outside the courthouse, after the shouting, the crying, the chanting of Guardian of the Silent Child, Silver Creek felt different. Lighter somehow. Like the whole town finally exhaled for the first time in weeks. But even with justice served, even with Brian behind bars, there was still Ava. Her silence, her fear, the way she folded into herself like she was made of paper. Nothing about that changes overnight. But hope? Yeah. Hope has a way of sneaking in quietly. And it happened at the Silver Creek police station, early one cold morning. Snow still falling, footprints fresh and crisp outside the front doors. Daniel was in his office, filling out paperwork, with Coda lying on the floor beside him, head on his paws, ears twitching each time a phone rang. Ava's lips twitched. At first, Daniel wasn't sure what he was seeing. Thought maybe she was about to cry again. But no, her lips curved upward, just the tiniest bit, like sunrise peeking over the horizon. Her first smile in 52 days. Small, soft, wobbly, like her face was relearning how to make that shape. Daniel felt his breath stop. Her grandmother gasped. A young officer passing by whispered, "Holy crap." She smiled. Ava lifted her arms. Not fully, just enough. And Coda, gentle as a whisper, walked forward and pressed his big, furry head into her tiny chest. Like he was saying, "Hey, kid, it's okay now. You're safe." Ava closed her eyes and let out a tiny, shaky giggle. A giggle. So soft you could have missed it if you blinked. But real. Daniel looked away, pretending to rub his eye. But everyone knew. It wasn't dust. It wasn't allergies. It was healing. Real healing. Ava ran her fingers through Coda's fur. Slow, careful, reverent, like she was touching something sacred. Coda stayed perfectly still. Didn't want to ruin the moment. Didn't want to move without her permission. And then Ava whispered, "Barely." softly, but clearly. Hi, Coda. Time to... Her grandmother broke into tears. Daniel's heart fell straight through the floor. A female officer whispered, "Oh my God." It wasn't much, just a name, just 2 syllables. But after 52 days of silence, it sounded like a miracle. Coda nuzzled her chin. Ava giggled again, louder, and leaned until her forehead rested gently against his. She didn't look afraid, not in that moment, not with Coda, because he wasn't just a dog. He was the one thing that never let her down. The one creature she trusted without thinking. The one who carried the truth when she couldn't speak it. And her small, messy, brave smile told everyone in that room the same thing. The darkness wasn't winning anymore. Ava was coming back, a little at a time, piece by piece, smile by smile. And honestly, watching her transform like that, you could feel something deep in your bones. Healing, hope, whatever you want to call it. And honestly, after seeing Ava smile like that, after 52 long, painful days, you'd think the station had already felt its most emotional moment of the year. Like, how do you top a miracle? Turns out, you can. And Ava proved it the very next week. It was a Thursday morning, the kind where the sun finally breaks through the winter clouds and makes the snow outside glow like diamonds. The station was quieter than usual, everyone still riding that soft little wave of hope Ava had started. People talked a little lighter, walked a little slower, smiled, just a bit easier. Daniel was at his desk again, typing reports, while Coda snoozed at his feet, legs twitching like he was chasing something in a dream. That's when the front door chimed, soft, gentle, almost musical. Ava walked in holding something, bundled up again. Same red sweater, same tiny boots, same hesitant but brave little steps. But today, there was something clutched in her hands, a sheet of paper, crinkled around the edges from being held too tight. Her grandmother followed behind, smiling in that "my heart can finally breathe again" kind of way. Daniel stood immediately. "Hey there, kiddo," he said, trying to sound casual, though his voice cracked halfway. Coda lifted his head. The second he heard her boots, his ears perked, tail doing that slow, steady wag that said, "My kid is here." He stood, stretched, and trotted toward her like she was his entire world. Ava didn't squeal, didn't run, didn't giggle. She just smiled, soft, shy, and held out the paper with both hands. "For Coda," she said. Her voice was tiny, still recovering, but clearer than last week, like every word was a step forward. Daniel knelt. "You made something for him?" Ava nodded, twisting her boot toe against the floor. Daniel flipped the page and froze, because on that paper was a drawing, Ava's drawing, of Coda. Not the way adults draw. No. The way a child draws when something inside them overflows into bright colors. Coda, standing tall with white angel wings stretching from his back. Huge, feathery, glowing. On his chest was a golden heart, and on that heart, 3 crooked little words, written unevenly because she was 3 years old and still learning letters. My hero dog. Daniel swallowed hard. Then he noticed something else. Behind Coda was a little girl, Ava, holding his tail, smiling with her eyes closed. And below the drawing, in shaky handwriting, her grandmother clearly helped shape. Coda saved my mom. Coda saved me from the dark. The room went silent. Not heavy silence, not fearful silence, a soft silence, a holy one, warm, gentle, healing. Ava tugged Daniel's sleeve. Do you like it? Daniel had to look away. Fast. He stood up, cleared his throat, wiped his eyes like he was scratching them, coughed twice. Yeah, sweetheart. I love it. It's beautiful. Coda sniffed the drawing, then gently booped it with his nose like he understood every inch of it. Ava giggled. That tiny giggle set off a chain reaction through the whole station. Officer Martinez froze mid-sip. Dispatch whispered, "Oh my God." Sergeant Weller, the toughest man alive, walked in, saw the drawing, blinked twice, muttered Jesus, and walked right back out with suspiciously watery eyes. Ava held out her arms, and Coda, being the big soft teddy bear he was around her, pressed his forehead gently against hers. Their little ritual, their little language. Ava whispered, "You chased the bad thing away, Coda." Her grandmother covered her mouth, crying. Daniel's heart just dropped. A female officer near the door let out a choked, "Oh my God." It wasn't much. Just a sentence, just a tiny truth. But after everything she'd been through, it hit like a miracle. Her grandmother whispered, "She wanted to bring it to him all week. She keeps saying Coda is her angel." Daniel finally found his voice. "You want us to hang this up?" Ava nodded so fast her little ponytail bounced. "Right here," she said, pointing to the bulletin board behind Daniel's desk. "So he sees it every day." Coda wagged his tail, nudged her hand, and let out a soft, happy huff. And honestly, the whole station melted. Because this wasn't just a drawing, not just crayons on paper. This was proof. Proof that the little girl who had once been trapped in darkness was stepping back into the light. Proof that healing doesn't always come from medicine or therapy or even time. Sometimes It comes from a dog with big brown eyes and a heart too loyal for words. Daniel pinned the drawing on the board with shaking hands. Everyone stepped back to look at it. And for the first time in a long time, the station felt whole. Hope didn't just appear. It lived there now, on that wall, in that picture, inside that little girl's smile. And truth be told, after that drawing went up on the bulletin board, after everyone in the Silver Creek station had their little "I'm not crying, you're crying" moment, there was this feeling running through the whole town that something big was coming. Not bad big, not scary big, just important. Because a story like Coda and Ava's doesn't end quietly. It deserves a moment, a real one. So, a few weeks later, the Silver Creek County Courthouse, the same building that once echoed with fear, sobs, and whispered prayers, looked nothing like its old self, not even close. The steps were covered in red, white, and blue banners, railings wrapped in ribbons, paper snowflakes hung from street lamps, glitter catching the wind. And from the roof, long strings of confetti dangling like frozen fireworks. It was the town's biggest crowd in decades. People packed shoulder to shoulder across the courtyard. Kids on parents' shoulders waving little flags. Elderly folks in fold-out chairs clutching tissues because they knew they were going to need them. Silver Creek never did anything halfway. And for Coda, they went all in. Daniel walked out first. Clean uniform, polished badge, hair actually combed for once. Coda trotted beside him, wearing a brand new K9 vest with service and courage stitched in gold on the side. The moment the crowd saw them, it wasn't quiet, not even close. Cheers exploded across the courtyard, loud, proud, unstoppable. "Coda! Good boy! We love you! Hero dog!" Honestly, it was the kind of applause rock stars dream about. But Coda? He didn't puff his chest, didn't act cocky. He just walked the way he always walked. Calm, steady, ears perked, tail swaying slow, like he wasn't there for the attention. Like he was there for one person only. And sure enough, there she was, Ava, standing on the small wooden stage with her grandmother, clutching something shiny in her tiny hands. Time 1.6, a medal, a real one. Silver base, gold front, shaped like a star with a paw print pressed right in the center. The mayor stepped forward, adjusting her scarf against the winter wind. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor bravery, loyalty, and a bond that saved a family and a town." The crowd quieted, just enough to hear her. For his instinct, his courage, and his heart, we present this medal to Coda, the hero who listened when no one else could. Daniel exhaled, slow, deep, like weeks of weight rolled off his chest. Then the mayor smiled at Ava. "Sweetheart, we'd like you to do the honors." The entire crowd melted. Ava looked so small on that stage. White winter coat with fuzzy trim, boots dangling above the floor, cheeks pink, eyes wide, brave, shimmering. Daniel guided Coda forward, kneeling him gently in front of her. And a hush fell across the courtyard. Ava, hands trembling, lifted the medal and slipped the ribbon over Coda's big, furry head. It slid down and rested perfectly against his vest. The moment it touched him, the entire courtyard erupted. Clapping, cheering, screaming. One woman sobbed openly. A teen boy whispered, "Dude." Even old Mr. Halpern, who hadn't stood from his cane in years, pushed himself upright just to clap for the dog who healed their town. But Ava wasn't done. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around Coda's neck, and pressed her cheek into his fur. A tiny gesture, but so full of trust that even the wind seemed to pause. Then she whispered into the microphone Daniel held low for her. "He knows. He saved us." And that was it. That was the moment everyone broke. People cried into scarves. Hands clutched hearts. A group of teens started clapping again, even though the applause had never stopped. A baby started wailing. Even infants felt the emotion in the air. Daniel wiped his eyes. No pretending this time. No hiding. Just a man grateful beyond words that his partner changed a little girl's life. Coda nuzzled Ava, gently, blinking slow, as if saying, "I'll always know. I'll always protect you." And with the crowd cheering, confetti swirling, and the medal shining like a torch against the winter sky, Silver Creek stood united, not by tragedy, but by hope, by healing, by courage, by a silent hero who didn't need words to tell the truth. Now let me ask you, and I mean this honestly, if you were right there in that snowy courtyard, what would have hit you the hardest? 1. Ava's words. 2. Coda wearing that medal. Or 3. The whole town crying together?